Hello everyone, hello, welcome to the live stream for another chill Tuesday live stream. Hello. I know I look different. I did something different with my hair today. How's everyone doing? Hello Manon. Hello. We made it. The hardest part. We showed up. It's always a good start. How's everyone doing? Telling you, it is a cold day here in Wisconsin. Cold day. We got down to 20 something degrees, Freedom Fahrenheit units, for those who are not in Freedom Fahrenheit unit territory. 20 degrees last night, got a little chilly. We're finally running the wood stove, trying to keep the house warm. Got heated blankets all over the place. It's coming. Winter is coming. George R.R. Martin was not lying. It truly do be happening. Hello. It truly do be happening. All right. You know, I'm feeling today, I've had a coffee. I've already had a black tea. I'm feeling like today is like a chill, crank up the music, do some writing. Maybe like some people feel this way with rain, where it's like, oh, it's a rainy day, it's going to be a good writing day. For me, it's the cold. I'm like, it's a cold day, time to buckle down, put a blanket across your lap and write. And that's my kind of day. I've had a lot of caffeine. It hasn't really hit. Like I needed it to. But you know what? We're going to do some writing. In fact, I was so inspired to write today, whether by the weather or by all that caffeine. I actually sat down for about 30, 45 minutes before the stream and went ahead and started typing. Started telling my story, you know? So got a couple words down already. If you were not able to join us yesterday, we made some great progress. We did some writing. We talked a lot about a lot of questions regarding story. And I specifically wanted to talk about two things. One thing I talked about yesterday that I want to bring here as well, because it is also important, is the fact that we are about at that point for a lot of people where you are just getting done with your Act 1, your inciting incident, and moving on to Act 2 in a traditional 3-act story. For those who don't know why that's important, it is really easy to plan your Act 1, and it is really easy to plan your Act 3, right? So like Act 1, how does my story start? Who are my characters? What's the big exciting incident that kicks everything off? And Act 3 is, how do I want my story to end? What's that big moment, that big climactic moment at the end of my story that is like exciting and exhilarating and really like ties everything up in a nice bow? But then you have half of your entire story is between those 2 points. In a traditional 3-act structure, you have 25% as your Act 1, 25% as your Act 3, and then the middle 50 is what we call Act 2. This is typically, in my experience, the part that is hardest to get through. Manon says, I definitely have 3 major questions about writing today. I can't wait to hear them. But when it comes to that sort of Act 2 approach, a lot of writers will get there and say, I don't really know how to keep things exciting, how to keep things moving. I don't really know how to keep going with my story. because we're now in this middle 50%, and that's way harder than all of your other stuff. So I wanted to give you a quick tip on your middle 50%, something that I found really helpful. Right? You have your act 1. You know where your characters start. You probably have an idea for how your story is going to end, which means you have your act 3. You have your starting point and your ending point. I have found it really helpful to look at those 2 points and plan out 3 major events or checkpoints or progress points that my characters are going to have to go along the way. And now, instead of writing 50% of my novel and trying to figure out how to get from here to there, I just need to figure out each one of those little thirds of those sections. And then if you break that down into an intro, inciting incident, crisis, climax, and resolution, story recursiveness, baby, from the Story Grid by Sean Coyne, things look a lot more feasible. And that's what I'm doing with my story. Another quick recommendation, if you do choose to approach writing your middle 50% this way, each one of those 3 little checkpoints that you hit, raise the stakes. Ask a couple more important questions or answer questions that you previously didn't have the answer to. That sort of progression of making things a little bit more severe, those are big. That's a big point. A couple different writing books call that as the point of no return, where your character just can't walk away because something new has happened and it just changes their perspective on everything. Gav says, I haven't been able to join many of these streams, but I'm here now, and that's the important part. You are here now. Let's go. Means we can talk story and we can have a productive, nice, chill writing session. If you have questions in the chat, go ahead and throw them in the chat. Manon, thinking about you. And while you post those questions, I want to talk about one more thing. We are also about at that point where this is sort of where people start. This is about the point where people start waning in their motivation. You've gotten past your inciting incident. Now you're at the hard part of writing your story. This is about the point where a lot of people start to lose focus. And I just want to tell you one quick thing about this. Of course, I could tell you, keep showing up to the live streams. We're going to keep writing. Of course, I could tell you that. I could tell you to write when you're not in the live streams. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to tell you this one thing. It is very important. It is very important that you push and keep writing. Here's why. Most people who start their first draft will never finish it. Most people who start their first draft will never finish it. Most people who finish their first draft, maybe they'll edit it, maybe they'll share it with the world, maybe they'll shelf it. I don't really know. It could go either way. Here's the important thing I want to point out. While most people who start their first draft will not finish it, I firmly believe that most people who finish their first draft will continue writing for the rest of their lives. Most people who finish their first draft and put that story out into the world will get hooked on that feeling of telling a story and having people read it, and will write for the rest of their lives. So it is important. I'm telling you, it's important to keep on writing. Maybe it's this project. Maybe you really lock into your next project. But you have to, since most people aren't going to finish their first draft, if you really push and you really go for it, and you do finish your first draft, I can almost guarantee you that this will not be the only story you write and complete. You're going to catch the bug. That's why it's important to finish that first draft, because that really kicks off that lifelong drive to keep writing. That's what happened to me. I've written all kinds of stuff. I've sat down and written all kinds of things, but I never finished anything. And for a long time, I wasn't quite sure if I had the guts to do it. And then there's a whole conversation of sharing it out in the world, of course. But once I had not even this book in my hand, but the proto draft, which I think I still have back here. Yeah, hold on. Once I went over to the printing place around here and I printed off my proto draft, just Put it out on Scrivener. We'll talk about this when we do our big writing book expose live stream in December. Once I held this in my hand, I was like, dude, I get it. Like, I am so proud to even have a proto draft, not even the finished thing. I had all kinds of notes that I went through and I did all this editing. As soon as I held this in my hand, I was like, dude, I get it. I get it. I get why the Stephen Kings of the world and the Sandersons of the world and all of these prolific authors keep doing it, because like it feels amazing. And I want you to feel that too. So keep pushing, keep driving. You can finish your story, set yourself realistic goals, write a 40,000 word story, write a 25,000 word story, write a story. End of sentence. You can do it. Just wanted to share that. You can finish that first draft. You can edit that into something you want to share with people. I think you'll be writing for the rest of your life. Manon says, my first proto draft was back in 2020 and it was horrible. I still have an episode of it in my Google Drive. Hold on to that. I think, like, I use this book. This is Starlight Farms Kennel for Talking Dogs, by the way. I use this book. I know it's not, like, I'm really proud of that book. I really like the characters I presented. I really like the dialogue. I really like the story. It's not a perfect book, but I'm okay with that because this will always serve as like a checkpoint of where I was in my writing journey, the kind of things that I did well, the kind of things I was maybe not as great at. This is sort of a checkpoint of my writing life. And my next book will be another checkpoint, and then another, and then another, and then another. And then all of a sudden, you see Carson, who writes pretty well, and you get to see where he came from and all the mistakes that he made. And then that's just like my entire timeline of being a writer. And I think that's dope. So hold on to your first proto draft. Use that as your comparison. Writing is such a slow art form that sometimes it's hard to recognize and celebrate your progress, but you should. Definitely should. All right. All that being said, I'm done with my spiel. I think it is about time to write. I want to open this up for any writing questions. Is there anything you are currently encountering in your proto draft that you need to discuss? Anything that, you know, did you hit writer's block? How and why do you think that is? Stray Bubble, welcome to the chat. Ayo. Did you hit writer's block? Do you feel like you're up against a brick wall? Do you feel like your characters aren't quite landing? Any questions you have about things you are encountering in your writing right now, this is a great time to ask them before we actually sit down and write. Also, I need to update my word count. I did some writing before the stream, and I'm at 13,400. 400. Not bad, not bad. Stray Bubble, glad you could join us. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. All right. Then I think it's about time to start writing. I'm putting 20 minutes on the clock. You know how this goes. 20 minutes on the clock. Microphone going off. Music going up. I got my headphones on. I'm listening to my own music. Manon, go ahead, post your questions in the chat. Let's come back to them after we write and tackle them. All right. That way you could get all 4 of them in there if you would like. Okay. Microphone off. Timer's going. Let's do some writing. First writing sprint done. How'd everyone do? We have a couple different people join us. Danish Pastry, hello. So happy to see you. Lantern Valley, glad you were able to make it. Manon says, man, the stock music do be hitting. This is a curated, royalty-free lo-fi playlist. I worked hard to find these like 5 songs. I hope it's diverse enough that it's not getting too boring. It's meant to just be background music, but if there was like one song that really stood out, you'd probably notice it every time it played, and then you'd be listening to the same, you realize there's only 5 songs, so I hope it's okay. I really did scour through my the website I used that for royalty-free music to find the good stuff. Got you. Today I threw on my headphones. Normally I write with my own lo-fi music. I actually don't have our lo-fi playlist for the live stream coming out of my speakers. 1, don't know how. Nice. He's a pro. And 2, I don't know if it would really come through the microphone and have all these, issues. So today I threw on my own headphones so I could write to my own lo-fi music. Grump says, I just found your channel yesterday and I love it. New to the whole writing thing. Still warming up to the actual act of writing. Thought I'd pop in and see what's going on. Grump, welcome. So happy that you found the channel. That means a lot. Thank you a lot for that. You know what? You found a good time to get interested in writing. Of course, there's all kinds of great YouTube videos out there. Highly recommend. But the good thing, live events, I can tell you 1 or 2 really important things. Number one, if there's one writing video I would suggest you check out of mine, there's a bunch of writing videos I would suggest of other people's, but of mine is the proto draft video on my channel. That's a big one that really helped me finally just be able to buckle down and write. But also, kind of a cool thing, Grump, you're joined right in the midst of Novella November, where we're all writing stories and keeping each other updated on the progress that we're making and sharing our writing processes. Which means if you click the playlist down below, you can actually see like 10 hours of actual novel planning that we did a couple weeks ago on Livestream. If you just need something to, I don't know, to sort of see through and see in real time what it looks like. And if there's any tidbits you can take away. What we're doing in Novella November is we've all chosen stories that we want to write. And then we have these live streams where we chat about story stuff. We answer questions like we're about to answer Manon's question in the chat. And we have some like dedicated focused writing time. Now everyone here gets to do some writing and update everyone on their progress. We said that, who posted that? Stray Bubble, 200 words, love it. I am officially up to now 14,024 words. Let's go make that update. 14,024. So I had to make a decision in my story before we tackle Manon's first question. I had to make a decision in my story is that I kind of ended this major section of my story with like, the day kind of ending. And then I started writing the next morning. But then I realized there was another major important story beat that I needed to accomplish that needed to take place between those two things. And I could like try to finagle something, change my timeline. I had this plot framework that said back here, let me go by. I just had written the ending to this like don't do it story beat. Our main character has discovered something's wrong, and like there's maybe the hints of like people knowing more than what they know, and this body that's been found, it seems like there is it's not an accident essentially. But then I realized that there's another moment that we need that happens for a character to basically say, I know I'm being told to not investigate this thing. I know I'm being told that I'm gonna lose my job and this opportunity in this place to like, if I keep barking up the wrong tree, that I need to make that decision. And I had totally forgotten about that. The good thing is I'd started writing the next morning as sort of mending this argument between two characters that we had. And I realized there's nothing stopping me from just continuing what I had written before, and instead of having it end, having the chapter end, where is it? I had it ending, I'm sure you do, Matthias, that's I think how I want to pronounce it. Pushed open the door to his room, he slipped in, the door shut behind him without another word, and Adam was left in the living room alone. Previously, I ended the chapter there. I just went back and I started writing more so I could get to this next story beat to set everything up for the next day. So instead of having it end there, I just appended some more onto the end of this, created a new story beat, and I'm going to extend this day. And I can even keep what I wrote for the next morning to start mending the relationship between these two characters. But kind of an unexpected thing. It felt naturally my chapter should end here, and then I realized I still had a lot left to do. So maybe that happens to you. Got to go back and make it all make sense. So that's what I did. Let's talk about Manon's question that they posted before we started doing our sprint. They said, I have 4 protagonists in my story. Michael, who's the main character, or maybe Al. Okay, hold on. Michael, who's the main character. Venus, who's currently an alive object. Emma, a teenager. And the 4th, who is in the gray in the story's catalyst. So basically, you have 4 protagonists. How do you balance them in a story? First thing I would tell you is that there are plenty of books that you can sort of look to for inspiration that have a lot of protagonists. The Wheel of Time, in a fantasy sense, is one of those major sort of pivotal high mark in the fantasy series, and they happen to have a very specific core group of characters that we follow. If I had to name them off the top of my head, I think there's 4 teenagers that are the main protagonists. There's 1 extra character that comes from their village. And then we have 2 additional characters that are very pivotal to what happens in that story. And so what happens there is we kind of choose one specific character who is kind of like our main perspective in these situations. Goodbye, Gav. Congratulations on the 127 words. That's progress. Kind of have like a main perspective in these multi-perspective situations. What you can do is say, all right, we have our main character. I'm going to really focus on them, and all of the other characters are there to support that story. That's what some books do. Danish Pacer says 6 of Crows and Crooked Kingdom also has multiple protagonists. I haven't read 6 of Crows. I've heard really great things, and then I've heard other things. General consensus seems to be that it's really good, so I'll need to check it out at some point. There is another approach to this, though, and it's the approach that Game of Thrones does in the Game of Thrones books. So, Manon, what happens in those books is we have a lot of scenes that contain characters that have had their own individual perspectives in other chapters. For example, Jon Snow, we've had chapters where we've seen his perspective and how he understands the world and how he processes information and how he connects with people. And we've had other chapters where we see the world from Sansa's point of view, and we understand how she thinks and how she processes information differently than Jon Snow. And we've also had chapters from Ned Stark, the patriarch of this family. But there's also scenes that happen that have all of these characters in the same room. And what George R.R. Martin does is he considers the scene and what the big takeaway from that scene is, and then tells that scene from the character that's most important to understanding that information. For example, if you ever decide to pick up the first Game of Thrones book, in the very early chapters, we have situations like this, where you could have written it from Jon Snow's perspective, or Ned Stark's perspective, or Sansa's perspective, but the most impactful takeaway of that scene is in regards to Ned Stark. And so we have that scene from Ned Stark. Even though there are multiple perspective characters, that's one way you can handle that perspective. You're really focusing in on the mindset of one of those characters, even though there's multiple perspectives, if that makes sense. All of that to say, there's different ways to approach it. And for you, how to balance them in a story, my number one recommendation would be to really focus on telling your main character's story and realizing that the others are supportive casts. They are all protagonists. They are all working to achieve a specific goal. They may all have their own individual journeys and arcs through your story, but whose story is this really? It seems like Michael, who was your main character, as you say, it's their story. How do we make sure that that's always kind of the focus? You can have other things happen to these other perspective characters, but if you were to plot out everything in the novel and say how much time do you spend with each character, there's likely one character that gets more attention than the others. That's the character we really want to focus on their journey. We want to give our other characters additional moments, but it's all kind of in support to that main character's journey overall. That would be the easiest way to approach it, to try to balance it. Of course, there's other authors that, you know, walk a very fine line and are able to balance 4 characters evenly, and it never feels like anyone's lacking attention or lacking focus. But it becomes harder. To do all of that balance with the more characters that you have. That doesn't mean you should always plan to only have one character, but it means that I would recommend you decide, here's the main story I want to tell. All of these other things are kind of side quests to our main quest, but they're there truly to support our main character. That would be my biggest recommendation to any writer who's fairly new at putting together a multi-perspective story. I have avoided it personally. Gabriel says, how do you do that but avoid main character syndrome? Now, let's talk about what we consider to be main character syndrome. Does anyone think they have a good understanding or a good quick definition for what main character syndrome might be? I want to hear your thoughts. Danish Pacer says, how exactly do you define main character syndrome? And I'm asking this because I want us to be on the same page for the discussion. Because what I might consider to be main character syndrome may be different than what someone else considers it, and then we'd just be all over the place. So let's find a good definition for that. Because I don't know, hot take, I don't know if I believe in main character syndrome. Because I think narratively, you kind of do want to have a main character. I mean, all the characters think similar to the main protagonist. That's what Manon says. The world revolving around that character, Gabriel kind of reckons. Here's the thing. If we take Manon's sort of description here, and I would love to hear more. So if you want to take a shot at a definition in there, this is a good jumping off point for discussion. If we take Manon's kind of understanding, all the characters think similar to the main protagonist. That's not necessarily a symptom of your story. That's a symptom of your writing and you understanding your characters. So in that case, my recommendation to you, if that's how we would say, like, oh no, now there's like this idea that like my characters are too much of the same. Number one, you're never gonna nail down your characters in your first draft in the way that you want. At least not at the beginning of your story. You're going to figure out your characters and give them more distinctive voices as you write. But number two, this is an important thing I had to learn at some point, which was when I love telling this story. When I was first writing, I had an epiphany moment. When I was first writing, I had this epiphany moment where I was writing these characters, and what do you do as a writer? You kind of base your characters a little bit on yourself, because who do you know better than yourself? So you make these characters and you're like, I'm a logical and reasonable person, so my characters should respond logically and reasonably to all these events, because of course that's what a realistic person like moi would do. And then what you realize is your story is hella boring because everyone's like, clearly this was a miscommunication, let's talk it out. Now we're all on the same page and we all understand the miscommunication. Let us move on without any sort of drama or conflict because we are all logically and reasonably good people. I don't know if anyone else had that kind of epiphany one day as we were like, oh no, I consider myself to be logical and reasonable, and so I make all my characters like that, and then my story sucks. My characters suck. Something that I found is a good sort of exercise to do if you wanted to make more distinct characters so they all feel different, which I don't really think is the definition of main character syndrome, but we'll talk about it. I like to give every character at least one specific thing that they would react to unreasonably. And I think that is something that you want to include in your conflict. Danish Pacer says, I based some of my characters off people I disliked, so there was plenty of conflict. Pro tip. I like to go through and say, like, okay, I'm making this character. I don't even put a ton of thought into things like I'm going to type out the history of that character. Personally, I don't do that. I know a lot of people do. And then I like to take a character and be like, I'm going to say, like, here is a piece of topic or information or event or something that this character just simply cannot forgive. And of course I'm going to use that in my story. What's the point of making it if I'm not going to use that as conflict in my story? But like, for example, maybe I'll have a character who was betrayed by a friend at some point in the past, and now any sort of betrayal, however small, is unforgivable to them. Even if the most logical and reasonable person was like, oh, let me explain to you exactly why I did that. It was really for your own good. This character is going to be like, I don't trust you. I've been burned in the past. I cannot get over it. This is my thing. I like to give characters that sort of thing, especially in regards to if it connects to the theme or the major conflicts in my novel, because that's just good ammunition. He saw you break spaghetti and sensing your friendship's been in shambles. Watch out in the southern U.S. In the southern U.S., they be breaking spaghetti every night. Ask me how I know. I come from a broken spaghetti family. I know. Hold on. Exciting plot. The F you mean you're going in alone? All right, let's talk about main character syndrome. My understanding of main character syndrome in real life would be someone who thinks everything's about them. In regards to a narrative story, we need to have a main character. We need to have a main character that is kind of pivotal to everything that's happening in our book. I don't think that's a bad thing to have a character that feels like everything is about them. Maybe that's like a character flaw you want to explore, but you should have a character that plays a major role in a bunch of crazy things happening. That's exciting. We want to get the perspective of our reader in the confines of the conflict, and having a character they relate to that's always involved in that's a good reading experience. I think in regards to narrative stuff, you might call main character syndrome something like plot armor. But basically, this is a main character. They're never really going to be harmed in the story. They're never really going to be injured in a way that incapacitates them. They're never really going to like fall so far that they can't rise again, right? Plot armor in the sense of like, you know, oh, my main character's running from someone who's shooting guns at them. Oh, they got hit, but don't worry. Somehow it was just like in the meat of their shoulder and they're totally fine. Or they got shot in the chest, but oh, you know what? It just like didn't hit anything important. Or they're running past a set of metal rails and the bullets are ricocheting off all the metal railing, but nothing's going through, even though that entire stairway is 90% air. That's what they say about trees with golfing. It's 90% air. You won't hit a branch. So I would consider that to be kind of that a mindset of like, my main character is invincible in my story, to be kind of more of a main character syndrome in like narrative kind of stuff. I don't know. Plot extension for Stray, the understanding itself becomes a misunderstanding. Yeah. Opinion time. Should the main character always be the one defeating the main villain? Great question. I love that. Danish Pastry, I love having you in the chat. You always bring up great things to talk about. Let's talk about that. There is a game I played a long time ago. Very, very underground game called Fable 2. Let me know if you've ever played Fable 2 in the chat. Fable 2 had a very controversial ending. Here's why. You spend the entire game, hours and hours, up against this mastermind of a villain. And you grind. He even kills your dog. I know. Unforgivable, right? and you get to the end of the game, the main bad guy, spoilers for a game that's 15 to 18 years old. Okay, maybe not that old, but, well, actually, yeah, probably that old. Main character gets trapped in this like magic shell where they're basically paralyzed, being held up, and all they can do is talk. And we're listening to that main character explain their actions and talk crap to us and basically monologuing. Here's the catch: if you wait too long in that game, that main villain is monologuing, says something, one of your companions pulls out a gun and shoots them and kills them. And so many people were so mad because they didn't get to do it themselves. And there was no way that they knew that would happen. There was no way they could have jumped in to stop it and take that, that power back to do it themselves. And a lot of people felt cheated. I don't think in narrative fiction, your main character has to be the one who kills the protagonist. I do think you need a final confrontation though. Ideally, there's some way that your main character and your main villain have almost like a moment of understanding, especially if this is the last time we're going to see them. I love stories where the side character that we have is able to save our main character from that final blow or something like that. But there should at least be, whether or not you have our main character be the one actually ending it all, defeating the main villain, there should at least be a final conversation that these two get to have. Maybe not that exact second of, the villain being defeated, but a moment of discussion and understanding. I think that's important for your story. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Gabriel says, I just thought of another potential definition: robbing others of agency while taking it for themselves. Sometimes seen in multi-perspective stories, POV character gets the agency for the chapter. So that's an interesting point, and I think that would be a really good definition for main character syndrome in narrative fiction, Gabriel. The question is, you have to consider, first off, does every reader feel that way? That would be an interesting thing to consider. Do we have some readers that identify this sort of this should have been done by this other character versus the main character, or they only did this because they were the main character? Or was the author's intention specifically for something like this to happen, and why is there a disconnect between the writer and the reader? There's a lot to unpack there. That's a really good thing to consider. We always have, as authors, we have to figure out what's the reader experience going to be like as I write this thing? And is there a way I can do it better? Takes practice, takes attempts, possibly failures to kind of figure it out. All right, JPB says, I'd say main character syndrome is when all the other characters only exist to help or talk about the main character with no goals or agency of their own. Hey, that's a pretty good definition. I like that one. I could adopt that definition for main character syndrome. And of course, we'll say, with every kind of piece of writing advice, everything you ever hear in regards to writing, you can always append at the end of any tip or discussion, unless you do it well. So just know that's implied. All right, all of the characters only exist to help or talk about the main character with no goals of agency of their own, unless they do it well. Roll your eyes. Okay, yeah. So keep that in mind. Maybe there is a story that you've read where you feel like that was done in a good way. Good for that author. But that's something that drives me crazy when we talk about writing advice. Manon has question number 2. Are there any works out there where there are actual songs in the middle of the story like a musical? Kind of. Lord of the Rings is a very popular one. In fact, a lot of traditional fantasy had poetry and songs with lyrics included in the books. One of my favorites is Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams, which is a book that's so good, but I cannot recommend it to most people, simply because you have to like a slow burn book. And modern fiction, modern fantasy is so much more about like keeping the reader's interest and pacing. Traditional older fantasy, you kind of have to be seeking out those slow burn books. Name of the Wind, I believe they did have songs and lyrics as well. Patrick Rothfuss. So Manon, yeah, it is done. It is typically either done in traditional fantasy, is where I've mostly experienced it, or as homages to traditional fantasy. Modern fantasy, not so much. You might get some poetry. I don't know. It's kind of fallen out of style. JP says, finished my draft today. Oh, that is huge. Congratulations. That is awesome, JP. How long do you tend to let things rest before you start editing? 2 weeks. I know. 2 weeks is what I do. I do 2 weeks because, and this is something from Stephen King's On Writing. I think he also said, he might say a month. I don't have time for that. 2 weeks, I think, is enough time to kind of distance yourself from it. Don't go in and read it. Don't go in and look at it. You can still think about it. If you have notes right off the top of your head for chapters you want to address or change, jot them down, but then take time off and go back. I do think that time is important. It's almost like it's doing a little, it's like finishing a 40-meter dash and giving yourself a breather before you do it all over again. If you just turn around and keep going, you don't get that sort of rejuvenation. Also, I think it's nice to come back to your story and be excited to return, as opposed to just picking it up the next day. I personally also recommend printing out your proto-draft. Printing out your draft to do editing with some pen and paper. You know, we pulled this out earlier in the live stream. This is my proto draft for Starlight Farms Kennel for Talking Dogs. And what I did is I waited my 2 weeks or whatever. You can break that. 2 weeks, totally just like shot in the dark for amount of time. But in those 2 weeks, I kind of like just let myself take a break. Stop obsessing about it. Stop dreading the editing process. Just like taking a break. And then I'll tell you exactly what I did. And we'll do more of this in the big Starlight Farms Kennel for Talking Dogs live stream sometime in December. But what I did here is I printed this out and I took a big old note card. And on the front, these were my entire story notes. Things that stretched the entire story. But, so like things like, I'll even read some. Initial notes and points to emphasize. The very first thing I wrote on here says, establish Marcus and Rachel, the two main characters, as stronger, deeper characters. Introduction to characters needs to highlight relationship, their need for each other, and their differences. Something I feel like I didn't do super well in my proto draft, right? But then, so these were whole story kind of things. Put more emphasis on how magic is upsetting the areas around the keep. Change this character and this other character's last name. Consistency in time of day during the final sequence. But then if I open it up, each chapter, chapter 2, we need a dog. That's funny. Each chapter, I put another note card, taped it on there, and I basically just allowed myself to be able to jot down some things. Some things I wrote on the page. This just says repeat this. I don't really know what that means. But I bet Carson mid-edit was locked into something good. This was a lot of fun to do. It was a really cool experience. Now it says, question 3, final for the time being. For the sake of my work, I expanded the 5-act story structure into a 6-act one because Act 3 feels too long and difficult to tackle. How does a 6-act one work if there is one in writing? You can feel free to Google 6-act story. Maybe someone's put something together. I can think of a 5-act story. I've also seen a 7 and an 8-act story, but basically it's all the same. Here's the deal. It's all the same. it helps you figure out how many little bite-sized pieces you need your story to be. Here's the thing. 3-act story. 25% for your intro, 50% for the middle of your story, 25% of your total word. Those are all word counts. 25% of your total word count for the ending. Okay? 5-act story says 25% of your word count is act 1, your introduction. Let's break act 2, which is 50% of your story, into its own 3-act structure. That now becomes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then my conclusion, act 5. I hope that makes sense. Right? So instead of having just act 2 for 50% of your whole novel, which is insane, break it down into 3 parts, and now you have sort of a beginning, middle, and end of your middle 50% of your story. Sometimes that's a little bit easier to wrap your head around than just act 2. I think a 7-act story structure would be taking act 1 or act 3 and breaking it into 2 parts. Now we have the opening image as its own act, and then the inciting incident as its own act, and then breaking down your middle part into 3, and then you have your conclusion. Do you want to break that down? It's all taking your same story and breaking it down into the size of pieces you feel comfortable tackling. It's all abstract. It's all abstract. Danish Pacer says, guess I'll be looking up visualizations for these structures. I know there's a 3-act. I know there's a 7 and 8, maybe. They might be called point structures instead of act structures. It's all the same kind of thing. Find the one that fits your best understanding of your story. I don't use the same plot structure in every story I write. I try to figure out what kind of story I'm telling and what the shape of that story kind of looks like. So that means, like, typically I'm thinking, what's my introduction kind of look like? How quickly am I getting past that to the good stuff? What's this final scene gonna be kind of like? What's like the big climactic ending? And then like the middle, do I want this to be broken into a couple smaller parts? Is this like a slice of life thing? It has a lot less action. It's more of one big story. Is this going to have multiple set pieces that we're telling our story in? I'm kind of thinking about how many in my brain parts of the story are there. The introduction, the climax, what happens in the middle. And then I'm looking at other plot frameworks that exist. They don't even have to deal with acts. Starlight Farms, this one kind of was based on Dan Harmon's story circle. I'll pull that up. Here's what I mean. Here, I'll just give you the quick short answer. Find a plot that fits your understanding of your story. Or take one and modify it. That's what I did for my mystery book. Starlight Farms kind of used this Dan Harmon story circle. And you might be asking, why? Oh, wait, hold on. Let me pull it up on screen. You might be asking, why did I use this versus like a 3-act story structure? Or why did I not use a 7-point story structure or something like that? And that's because in my head, this was very much a story of here's where we start. Let's do things. And we're kind of coming back to the norm. We've gone off and we've come back, kind of like a circle. And Dan Harmon's story circle is very much like we start in a zone of comfort. We go on this journey. We return to our familiar situation and we see how things have changed. And that cyclical nature of this plot framework fit my understanding of my story. Could I plot this out in a 3-act story structure? Yeah, I probably could. Here's Act 1. Here's Act 2. Here's Act 3. In fact, that fits exactly our 25, 50, and 25% of the story. But putting it in this specific sort of cyclical nature fit how I understood my story. That's the framework you should use. The framework that makes sense to you for that story. So yeah, hope that answers your question. Also, I had that window up because I forgot the name of the person who does autopsies on bodies in like police shows. And so I actually wrote that in my story. You might like this. If I go over here to this morning chapter, I said, I think this is dumb. Is the autopsier person on the way? They're called a coroner, you idiot. An autopsier. Maybe they should rename them. I like my version better. Shout out to Forgetting Simple Concepts. What up? Have fun. Have fun with your story. I love putting in moments that make me laugh into my story. I hope they typically translate pretty well to the reader, in the sense of like understanding that this is supposed to be a lighthearted moment. Of course, be mindful. You don't want to be in the big climactic scene at the end of your story and your main character be like, wow, it smells like Updog in your evil lair. I said it smells like Updog in your evil lair. And then the villain's like, what? And he's like, it smells like Updog here. And then the villain's like, Updog? And the main character's like, yes, Updog. And then the villain's like, I don't know what you mean. He's like, no, it smells like Updog. And then the main villain's like, what's Updog? And then the main character's like, boom! Got him. Thank you. Thank you. I'll be here all week. I mean, yeah, each day. All weekdays I will be here. You'll find me here. All right. Let's tackle any other last questions. JP says, I love editing. I think it's much more rewarding than drafting. I don't know about that. I don't know about that part. I think you might be crazy. You might be crazy there. I will say the number one thing I recommend to everyone when they're editing, and I've said this in a couple videos, I got really down while I was editing. I did not find it rewarding. I found it just me highlighting all the things I didn't like about my book. And of course, like making them into better parts of the book is a good, like more rewarding process. But I found myself really focusing on like, I don't like my writing here. I didn't do this thing right, etc. So now when I do editing, I go in there and I'm doing my usual thing, like let's change this part, or this isn't a good representation of the character. But now I also go in with a different color pen and I highlight and circle and star specific scenes that I really like that I wrote. And I kind of celebrate those little wins, in addition to marking up all the things I want to change. For me, that was beneficial. If you already find editing rewarding, you psycho wild edit crazy person, that's yeah, good for you. I was very demoralized while editing. Danish Fish says, I like something Jet Hearn said, right now, worry later. For sure, definitely do that in the proto draft. I do not spend a ton of time going back to change things until I'm editing. All right. I think we are about ready to do some more writing. How's everyone feeling? Ready to do some focus, some productivity? Woo! I'm feeling good. Am ready. Same. Am ready. All right, we're doing it. The neurons are firing. I'm loving it. I am feeling motivated right now. Let's focus. Let's do some writing. I'm going to put timer on the clock. Switch over to my main scene. Background music going up. Good luck, everyone. Make some good progress. I'm rooting for you. Let's go. Another 20 minutes down. Man, that time goes so fast. It goes so fast. How did everyone do? What kind of word counts are we looking at? What kind of progress did you make? What kind of progress we got? I did, let's see. At 14,661. It looks like I get pretty reliably about 600 words every 20 minutes. Seems to be about my pace. I'm sure that'll change depending on how easy the scene is to write. Busin says, I almost finished a scene. Hey, that's progress, baby! That's progress. How'd everyone else do? Dayswaller says, lots of thinking about the conclusion. You gotta do it. You gotta do it. I call that passive planning, right? You're still working. You're still working on your story. You're just not actively, doing this little thing. Exile 600 words. JPB 694. Dang, look at that progress. It's that easy. You show up to the live stream. You got some royalty-free lo-fi music. Boom. 600-700 words. 400, 500, 600 words each time you're doing it. 200 words. That's progress. I love it. Good job, everyone. Good job. Good job. Good job. Lantern Valley, consolidating 4 documents of outlines into one. Ooh, you know what? That's a great time to really figure out your story. I love it. 4 documents of outlines into one spot. Also sounds kind of hard. I feel that. I'm at the conclusion of my Act 1, basically. I've had my main character figure out there's something more going on, be told not to do whatever, any investigation on this thing, hint at something more happening in this town. But now we're having a conversation between our main character and the love interest where she's basically going to convince him they're the outsiders. Maybe it's their job to solve this crime if the people who live here can't or won't. And then from that point on, it's going to be the actual solving of the mystery, which means all 14,000 words that I'm at here now is still Act 1. Still Act 1. My plot framework I was following said only write 10% of your story. Only write that 10% is your setup. So definitely not following that. Maybe it's going to follow the traditional 25, 50, 25 sort of percentage split between 3 acts. Maybe not. We'll see. Renegade Saving the Day is a classic in fantasy. I love it. I love it. Exile says, hey, I got a question. How do I write a war scene where a large army marches to attack a fort? Well, that's going to be an interesting one, especially because some of that comes down to the perspective. Is your story pretty grounded in like first person? We experience everything in first person through the eyes of a character? Because only writing that specific perspective means that you're kind of locked into telling the story through the eyes of the character, meaning they have to participate in this event somehow. What you can do if you are writing first person is you can sort of establish this idea that there are some scenes that you write that aren't limited to that first person perspective. You can have a first person story that has these moments where you zoom out to see bigger events. I've seen plenty of books do that. I don't think you can really write a big war scene without zooming out. Because even in a first person kind of story, a big war scene, you are in the eyes and the mind of one character in that scene. Kind of hard to portray the scale of something. But I've seen plenty of stories do that. Like, hey, this is like our main character. Now here's this excerpt, essentially, this chapter, this break from our story where we zoom way out and we see things from a sort of more omniscient third person Sometimes they might call it like a maybe not omniscience, what I'm thinking here. Third person limited, which would be like the movie perspective. Basically, here's just the events that we're watching. My character is the general of his army, and it's a medieval war fantasy. Here's another question for you, Exile. Is this meant to be a big scene? Or is this you giving information about this war as sort of a, this is something that's happening, here's something my readers need to know, let's continue the story? Because if this is meant to be a big scene, you're setting your general up to basically watch this from the from afar and giving out orders and speaking to their commanders about what's happening in front of them. If this is just meant to be like almost like exposition or a show of what kind of stakes we're dealing with or how smart our general is in regards to war, because then kind of don't want to write this long scene just to portray that. Because at that point, you kind of want to find a way to kind of summarize the elements of that battle, maybe after the fact, or in a situation where you can kind of get through it pretty quickly. Don't bog down your story writing the cool battle scene that you think will look really cool if it isn't really meant to be a pivotal moment in your story, because that's kind of a way to lose readers and lose pacing. Lantern Valley suggests skim over it with the cool stuff, skip to the part where the poisoned frog from the swamp knocks the general out and he misses the whole main event. We're kind of talking the same thing. If there's one book that's done big battle stuff well, it's the Malazan series. Malazan Book of the Fallen. Crazy. Even the opening scene of the very first book is an enormous battle with a floating island in the sky shooting magic into entire army battalions and breaking the earth. Crazy. But yeah, for your answer, Exile, part of it is what's the point of this scene? Is it you're going to spend a lot of time making this an interesting part of your story and like something incredibly important is going to happen in the midst of this battle? Or is it our dude's a general and there happens to be a battle going on? This is our chance to show what this general can do. If that's the case, you kind of want to skim past it. I would almost recommend going to after the battle and having like sort of like progress reports from other people where we're having a conversation about what happened, what we can do better, what do we do with the prisoners of war, blah, 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 blah. If it's a big turning point in the novel, which is what you're saying, then you drag it out. If it's a big turning point in the novel that you've been leading up to, you experience it as it's happening. My character's the general of the army. If it's first person, you're in that general's head. You don't have to show every single thing. It can almost be like skipping to the important points. What decision do we make here that's going to break open the siege that's going to lead to X, Y, and Z happening in your story? It doesn't have to be every minute played out, play by play. Yeah, and then there's also Stormlight Archive. Portrays a lot of big battle scenes really well. Brandon Sanderson. Let's see what there would be a couple things to look to. I don't know if you've read any of those books, but yeah, tough one. Writing big war scenes can be pretty difficult. It's really easy for you, the writer, to kind of get lost in telling that scene and just being excited to tell that scene. And then all of a sudden you realize you've written 2,000 words on that scene and the reader's skimming over most of it to figure out why this is important. Same thing with fight scenes. It happens a lot with fight scenes too. JPB says, I'd expect a general to be doing a lot of decision making and getting reports from scouts. It's kind of what I picture too. All right, here's the deal. We got 15 minutes left in the live stream. Let's end with a quick 10-minute sprint, and then let's talk about story for just a little bit and understand what's happening for the next time that we meet. We can end strong. Just 10 minutes. That's easy. That's another 300 words to your story. Come on. Let's try it out. Let's end strong. A little extra productivity here. We doing it. JPB says, thanks for the stream. Thanks for being here. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day. Good job doing some writing today. Proud of you. All right, microphone's going off. Music's going up. Danish Preacher says, let's go! All right, 10 minutes. Here we go. That is our final sprint done. Man, the time goes so fast. That's crazy. That's crazy. Hit 15,054. Let's go. 15,000. Or huzzah. How'd everyone do? That puts me at 2,000 words today, roughly. I deleted some. I wrote more. Word count gets a little crazy there, but how'd everyone do? How'd everyone do? That come through the microphone? My dry hands? Wolvie, yes, you just joined. I saw you come in. Hello, hello. Perfect timing, right at the final minutes of the stream. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Pretty productive stream. I'm kind of still feeling like doing some writing today. I think I'm also a little bit more productive when I have my headphones on and I got my own local lo-fi music playing. Landon Valley says, almost done with outline consolidation. Then it's going to be writing all day. Let's go. Hey, make sure you post in the Discord what kind of progress you get. Chicken Lover. I didn't write today, but I got some homework done. Nice. Are you related to Chicken Man by any chance? That is another fellow chicken-based chatter in our in our live stream. We got the whole chicken family. How about that? Yeah, Wolvie says better late than never, for sure, for sure. Chicken Lover, no relation to Chicken Man. Good to know. Good to know. Yeah. We got some characters around here, that's for sure. That's for sure. Oh man, good progress today, everyone. You showed up, you put in the work, you put in the time, and you made progress. That is key. I think I personally am roughly on pace to probably have my story at 40,000 words by the end of November. But I kind of feel like I'm getting into it now. I'm kind of like, I'm starting to relate to the characters, get a better understanding of who these different people are going to be. And that's usually when my production kind of kicks up a little bit. I still have set my goal. I told myself my goal was 50,000 words, but also for me, I kind of feel like it's a little bit of a meaningless statement. Like if I feel like my story's done at 40,000, then like I'm going to stop writing. But I don't think it's going to be the case. Considering I'm at 15,000, I'm still in Act 1. Danish Spacer says, do you plan on publishing it? I will definitely self-publish this for sure. I'm excited for it. I think when I wrote Starlight Farms, by the way, link below. When I wrote Starlight Farms, it was really fun to be in this cozy fantasy world. But it really made me miss having the opportunities to write tension and suspense and drama and danger. So I am excited to do this and then share it all with you and then talk about, you know, my whole editing process for this. How was this different than what I did for Starlight Farms? What was better? What was worse? You know, I'm all about transparency, putting all that good stuff out in the world. Yeah, I do plan on putting this out. Probably the same thing I did before. The cool part is, because we did so much of this on live stream, I'll probably show a little bit of my editing process in December as well, with how I would go about doing some editing with this. But then I think it would be really fun to bring you all along for the ride for things like choosing the cover and formatting all of that and getting this ready for printing when I'm at that point. I do not think this will be published this year. And again, I'm talking about self-publishing. I do not think this will be published this year. I think that we're probably, based on how quickly or slowly editing for Starlight Farms went, I kind of feel like this would probably land me at putting this out in like February, especially considering all the life stuff that happens between now and then. But we'll see. I may find out editing this is a very different experience than editing that other one. Considering I completely rewrote Starlight Farms from scratch as my third edit, like an idiot. So we'll see. But yeah, I definitely will share this with everyone, and you're more than welcome to read it. If you're on the live streams, like, there may be spoilers. Wolvie says, what do you think is better, self-publishing or normal publishing? I've made my opinions pretty clear on this matter. I think that in the past, like 20 years, a lot of what could be provided by traditional publishing is now also provided by authors themselves in self-publishing. Think about it this way. With the introduction of services like Fiverr, with the introduction of services like Amazon or eBooks or Kobo, these are all different places that you could choose to share like an ebook. With the introduction of so many additional services, traditional publishing used to have this chokehold on cover artists, on editors that were professional enough to churn out books that had, the kind of editing you need to make your book really shine. That is no longer the case. Readsy, another great place that you could go to get very professional editors and cover design artists and book formatters and formatters, I think is maybe the right word. A lot of that used to be completely locked down by traditional publishing, and that's just not the case anymore. I don't know how much you might know about the traditional publishing industry, and I can only speak about the U.S. traditional publishing industry. So if you live abroad somewhere else, maybe things are different. If you bring your manuscript to an agent, first off, you have to work to get an agent. Then you're going to bring that manuscript to a traditional publisher. The very first thing, I don't know if you knew if this is how it happens, but I'll give you the brief rundown. With traditional publishing, how it works is you go to a publisher. If they like your manuscript and they choose to work with you, you get an advance. Basically, them paying you a certain amount of money to sort of like kind of lock you down, encourage you to finish this, encourage you to be part of the process as you get your story to the final version. But what happens is, first thing, if you are a brand new author, that advance is probably not anything like what you're expecting in your head. I believe most advances nowadays, especially for new authors, are going, unless there are definitely outliers, I will say this, most advances are probably going to fall in the realm of 4 figures. You might get paid $5,000 for your manuscript. And then what's going to happen after that is your manuscript is going to go to a bunch of those traditional publishing editors. They're going to work with you to say, like, well, let's do this thing, let's do that thing, let's trim this up, let's expand on it, let's add this scene. That's not a bad thing. That's a very good thing. You want to have professionals in your corner helping you make your story as good as you can. They're going to have cover artists that they work with that's going to, all of these things are taken sort of out of your control. As an author, you will most likely not get a say on what your book looks like at the final result. If that's okay with you, that's fine. Some people may not agree with that. They would like more control in things like what their book's going to look like. If you work with a publisher, if you go through this route, you will lose that sort of creative control. Now, I'm saying all that because, first off, everything from this point, before this point, you can do as a self-published author yourself through freelancing services and a lot of different avenues. What traditional publishing could then do after that is, if they believe, and here's the kicker here, if they think that your book is going to sell well, then they will help you market it. If they don't think that your book is going to be a trendy big hitter, they will not spend nearly as much to do that kind of marketing. They don't want to spend a lot of money on a book that they're not certain is going to return as well. Now, let's say you go through this route, your book does get published, you've done all this. Now what happens is, first, all of the money that the publishing company has basically spent on your book. And I don't know if this extends to every single aspect of the budget or just your advance. I believe it's every aspect of the budget. Basically, the publisher recoups all the money that they've put into your book through those sales of your book. Then after that, and that includes your advance, after that, you will receive a percentage of the royalties. Different contracts are going to be different things. There are some authors that are getting 4% of their royalties of their book. And all of these other percentages are going to other parties. Sometimes a book's illustrator, especially if you're doing like a picture book, could be getting a percentage of those royalties for every sale. Sometimes they'll be paid just a lump sum. Cover artists, editors, like the publication publishing company is going to be getting the majority portion of royalties on that book. From that point on, every time you make a book sale, you'll be getting a little bit of that money. That money will come back to you in the form of checks in perpetuity for however long. Okay, that being said, what does a traditional publishing company get you that you can't get yourself? There's that advance sum, right? You're getting paid for your manuscript, but you are not getting your royalties. That being said, if you go to self-publish, you also are not getting all of your royalties. If you watch my video I did on the Amazon ads scam, I talk a little bit about this. For this book, which is priced at, I think, $13, maybe $14. For this book, I make, are you ready for this? You ready for this? $3.91. That's how the royalties work in self-publishing if you go the same route I did, which is through Amazon. If you go through Amazon, you pay less of a lump sum to get your book published, self-published. And the opportunity cost of that is that you get less in terms of royalties. So I didn't have to put as much money up to get this thing published. I didn't have to buy an ISBN, right? Which is the International Book Identifier thing. In the US, you have to buy those. They go about over $100 a pop, but you get a better sale as you buy them in bulk. You have to have that if you want your book to be sold somewhere, whether it's online or in a store. If you go exclusively through Amazon, you do not have to purchase one. They will give you one. Okay, so there's one thing you don't have to spend money on. Number 2, printing cost. These books are printed on demand, and there are other services out beyond Amazon that do this. This is a nice copy. It feels really good. If you pick this book up, you will tell like this is a nice reading experience. I don't think I have one down here. I did some test prints of a different trim size, a different kind of paper, and it came out feeling terrible. But if I were to have done my book through that trim size, those printing options that Amazon had, which felt really bad, the printing costs would have been lower. You can watch my Amazon ads video for a full breakdown, but basically Amazon, when you price your book, Amazon gives you a window of price ranges to say if you price your book between these two values, our market research says this is the most effective price range that readers will buy, right? Like we've done all this research, we have all this data. If you put your book between this price range and your Amazon exclusive, we'll give you like 70% royalties after we take our fees for all the stuff that we do. And that includes printing. I think these books cost $5 to print. So like $5.61 or something like that comes out of the price right away. So it went from being like $14 to like $9. And then Amazon takes some additional fees just for like hosting all the stuff that they do. So that's taken out of it. And then I get something like 70%, 60%, something like that. Consider that compared to what we were talking about with traditional publishing. I get a percentage of those royalties. Ebook is different. Ebook, there's no printing cost. That book is priced at like $3.99. I make like $2 and something on every ebook sale. This is the reality of book business. It's crazy, right? So yeah, I mean, you get more royalties. You may have to spend a little bit more money compared to traditional publishing, but it's kind of up to you to then market your book. My benefit was that I had, this YouTube platform and people who were gracious enough to want to read my story. And that is a crazy feeling to me. So first off, thank you to anyone who bought it. But like, people will always say, do not start writing because you want to make money, for all these kinds of reasons. There are things that you can do to min-max, to say, I want to get the most proceeds for a book sale, for spending the least amount of money up front. There's different things you can do. There's other places that you can go to get printing. You could say, I'm not going to print on demand. I'm going to buy 100 copies of my book and have them printed and then ship them out when people order from me directly. You could do things like that. You can even hook into Amazon using services like this, where I would actually package and send the book out if you ordered it. There's things you can do like that. But you're spending more money to get 100 books printed and shipped to your house for you to ship out, but now you're paying for shipping. Now there's your labor. There's all kinds of crazy different ways you can approach this. Book Baby is a website that can help you do that. They can also do print on demand kind of things. Draft to Digital, another website that has services for printing on demand. All these kind of things will have different sort of ways to approach the monetization. Wolfie says, what would you recommend for 70 to 18-year-old with $55 income a month? Self-publish. Also, the thing is, like, I will pretty much always be a proponent of self-publishing. At some point, I think I'd like to go through the experience of trying to get something traditionally published and working with an agent and all that kind of stuff to see what it's like. But I'm not going there because I think that that's always going to be the better deal. If you are continuously writing, if you're continuously putting out books, you can create your own fan base. And every new book you put out sends more people into your back catalog to find more books written by you. And if you write a series and you put that out into the world, you pay to advertise on things like Amazon or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. Anyone who picks up that first book has a pretty high likelihood they're going to keep reading through your series. That's why it makes more financial sense to write a series. Book business is crazy. What would you recommend for someone who's getting $55 a month income? At that point, if that's the kind of money you're making, and I don't know if this is US dollars or anything like that, but I'll basically say if you're on a super budget, and you want to put out a book in the world, the very first thing you can do is utilize the resources that you have around you in writing communities. Have someone, you instead of paying for an editor on Fiverr, which may set you back a couple $100s, see if there's someone in a writing community that you guys can trade and do editing for each other. Just simply having another set of eyes to look at your story, to do copy editing, line editing, any kind of editing, is a way that you can get those sort of services from someone who's not a professional, but maybe knows more than you do, or different things than you do, and get your book to a closer finishing state. You are not going for a flawless book. I'm on rant mode now. You are not going for a book without flaws. Maybe you think you are. You will not self-publish a book without flaws. There are books that I've read by indie publishers that are huge, that are getting $100,000 on Kickstarter for them writing this next book or this next series. And you know what? I picked that book up. I still find mistakes in there. Do not hold yourself to a perfect standard as a self-publisher. You are not working with the best editors in the world. You're working with what you have to tell your story to people who want to read it. Wolfie says, if I self-publish, then 1 year later I choose to traditional publishing or switch to traditional publishing, can I still publish it traditionally? It's going to be in regards to the publisher that you're working with. There have been cases where people have self-published, that book's gotten really popular, and then they've entered a publishing deal for that book. But that is an outlier. You've seen that with The Martian by Andy Weir. That was a self-published book. They got massive, and then they entered a publishing deal with Orbit or Tor or whoever does that one. Colleen Hoover, also, same thing. Colleen Hoover created a fan base with their books that was popular, and then entered into publishing deals to get those books out into the world on bookshelves at bookstores, okay? When that happens, you have the power. You have the power to go to a publishing company and say, I have a fan base. This book is making these sales. This book is popular. What can you bring to the table? Because I have already created the book, put it out into the world, and it's been popular. Now, what can you do for me? The power dynamic has shifted there. But that only happens in like outlier situations. That is definitely not the norm. There are... yeah, there's a lot of aspects of this, right? This is writing business. This is a whole different thing that I'm also still learning about and exploring. All the stuff I'm telling you is coming from, 100 hours of listening to podcasts and reading web articles and watching YouTube creators who are talking about this stuff over the past 5 years. That's all. I can actually give you some resources right now. Travis Baldry, who did Legends and Lattes, did a great write-up of him writing Legends and Lattes for a Novella November style event. Having it become popular, working with publishers, and did a whole like 8,000 word write-up about his whole experience from writing in Novella November to now the book being popular and successful and on bookshelves with publishing deals. There's a podcast called Six Figure Authors. I can't remember. I think it's Six Figure Authors. That is no longer making new content, but has an incredibly useful backlog of writing business stuff as self-published authors talk about why they're doing self-publishing now over traditional publishing, because they've established like, hey, I wrote these books, people like them, I kept writing, I'm putting out a lot of books, I have a fan base that keeps buying those books and is excited for them, they signed up for this newsletter. All of that is what you kind of want from traditional publishing as an author. But if you can develop it yourself, now you're in full control. It takes time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes treating your writing like a business. But that is an achievable thing that many authors are doing. For sure. You should clip this part of the video. I'll put you in the clip. Yeah. So that's all interesting stuff. If you guys have any additional questions about the process, this is just coming from someone who's done research, not from someone who has done it all themselves. So, a lot of what I'm saying may change in the future as I get more personal experience. So keep that in mind. All right. Any last questions? Any last questions before we wrap it up? Writing business is a whole different beast. It's interesting to learn about. It's very exciting to learn about. Once you have a book that you can partake in the writing business side of things, running like my Amazon ads, that's been a really interesting experience. I haven't run any Instagram or Facebook ads or TikTok or anything like that, but the Amazon ads has been a really cool thing to play around with. Wolfie says, why did you start writing? That's a tough one. I started writing probably because my parents were very adamant about getting books in front of their kids. So like we went to the library all the time. But I remember back in, grade school. So probably like less than 10 years old. Yeah, probably less than 10. I had to go to work with my mom. She worked at this like tax office and they just had like a spare office. I'd go in there and I would write stories about ninjas and pirates, which still to this day would love to write about ninjas and pirates. And then I would send it by fax to my dad where he worked to share it with him. So writing was always kind of a thing. I think that was encouraged by my parents. And then I think just the love for books meant I wanted to tell my own stories. Why did I start taking writing seriously? That's a different question with another long answer. Danish Pacer says, it's interesting to hear your process with covers. Can you see the cover in your mind? For this book, I do have the idea, like, I have a very, I think, visually almost compelling title, Upon Careless Gray Hills, right? So in my head, right off the bat, I have this vision of this very stark black and white illustration that sort of shows the silhouette of a person on a glacier, right? This is kind of like the illustration I have in mind. and then maybe just a dot of red somewhere in there. That's sort of like very striking contrast. That's what I have in my head right now. What I learned in working with this cover is both successful and a failure. This cover is both a very successful and a failure. Here's why. In the genre of cozy fantasy, this cover is not out of place. Yet, those who are not familiar with cozy fantasy will look at this and not be totally certain if this is a kid's book or an adult's book. In that case, this cover fails. What I should have done in doing the cover for that book, and what I will do in the cover of this book, is to bring my vision. So here's what I did here. I brought my vision to a designer on Fiverr who had this kind of like fantastical, almost fairy tale-esque art style that I really liked. I brought my vision that I had. They worked on it. They applied their own touch. I love this cover. It's got a little chicken on the back. That's from the book. I love it. I love this cover, but if I had gone through something like traditional publishing, I can tell you right away, this would not have been anywhere near the cover. There would have been a cover that was much more clearly meant to be like, this is not a child's book. I was chasing the trend of Legends and Lattes. If you Google that cover, it has an illustrated style that is very cozy. I was chasing that, but I believe that this cover failed in that regard. Of a lot of people look at this and ask, is this for kids or adults? And then that's probably not what I want people to be asking, because that's just another barrier to them picking up the book. So what I would do in this case is I would bring my idea to a designer, and then I would be very clear about the genre, be very clear about the tone, and I would put more of the decision-making power in their hand, because you should trust your book cover designer because they design books for a living. Now, you probably want to find a book cover designer specializes in the genre of your story, because they'll be familiar with all the trends. Or you can say, I'm writing a book, here's the style, here's a bunch of different books that inspired it, that are similar to it, that have elements I want to include in my book. That would be the best way to approach it. So I have a vision in my head, but I'm going to try to put more design power into the book cover artists' hands, and trust their ability to understand the genre, trends, and things like that. Lantern Valley says, get popular, self-published, then traditional publisher picks you up. Get popular with trad, and you write too much, and they won't publish it, so you go self-publish again, back and forth forever. That's the dream. That's the dream. We do a longer video on self-publishing and how to play with the print formatting. That would all be through Scrivener. That's how I did all of this. And it came out really nice. Everything from like how the chapters look, where the chapter begins on the page, all that stuff through Scrivener. I will. Yeah, I think that'd be a lot of fun to do. I try to make every part of the writing process available. So that will eventually be a topic we tackle. Jeff says, I got what amounts to 2 separate inciting incidents, which is making for a complicated start. The reason, establishing the normal world for my character could be somewhat dry without a conflict. A lot of people say when you are showing the status quo, the normal part of your world to the reader, what things are like before the inciting incident, it should be a day with conflict. We should get hints of what normalcy is like, but we should see your character stressing about something in that normal situation. Right? What's their day-to-day stress? And that's interesting enough to at least have the reader along for the ride until we get to the major inciting incident. But you never want to show a normal day, a normal situation. You want to show there's a fair coming to town. People are getting exciting, or, there's something that doesn't make the status quo truly the status quo, but gives us the status quo in regards to something that we're leading up to. Having 2 inciting incidents, I'd be interested to see what happens. Not bad. Other people have done it. Shout out to the Scriv. Scriv life. Represent. 2 separate inciting incidents. I would try to consolidate if possible. Try to consolidate. Wolfie says, do you think it's better to have smaller chapters or less bigger chapters? This is going to depend on how you choose to break up your story. I've talked about this a little bit before. This book has very small chapters. Look at that. Some chapters are 2,000 words. Some are longer. Some are, look at that, 200 something, 300, 400 words. Who knows? Oh, wait, that's not a chapter. That was a chapter break. Hold on. I got to prove to you that I wasn't lying. That's not a full chapter. My camera was just backwards. There are some small chapters in this book. I don't think there is a definite answer besides the fact that traditional publishers who have all the market research try to shoot for 2,000 words a chapter. That's the goal. And then you have shorter, you longer, you're averaging out, and then maybe big climactic moments that you want to spend more time with, you have those longer chapters. But that's the rule of thumb. Good questions, everyone. But I got to go eat lunch with my wife. I'll tell her you all said hello. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We made some great progress. I would love to see your update in the Discord. Thank you to Pro Writing Aid for sponsoring this live stream so we don't have a bunch of ads bombarding you. Pro Writing Aid is what I use for all my editing. It's one of the reasons why I don't need to spend as much money hiring a specific editor. It can get me so much closer to that professional end result because I use the right tools. You can check out Pro Writing Aid, 10% off at checkout using the link in my description and the code Writing Theory 10. You know the deal. You've seen it all before. In the one I'm writing, all chapters 2,000 words. There are some that 4 chapters have 2,000 words is the rule of thumb. You can always go higher or lower. That's the rule of thumb. Shout out Scriv Life. Shout out Scrivener. Scriv Life. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully, I'll see some of you tomorrow evening in our different time slot. Good progress. Keep it real. Keep it real, everyone. Hashtag Scriv. The Scrivener.